What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Chris Allen. Chris, what's going on, buddy?
Are you good? Because everybody else got hurt. I'm just making sure that you're healthy. I'm healthy. I went to go check in on my wife and kids real quick just to make sure that they were also not injured. Just the amount of number of times I heard of players going to the blue tent, and of course the catastrophic injuries that we're going to get into here shortly. I mean, we say it every week that it's a wild day of chaos throughout the entire NFL, but this one just takes the cake. And of course, it being in the first week of the fantasy playoffs, I'm sure a number of folks are probably probably sunk into the floor or something along those lines. But happy to be here, healthy with you, but hopefully everybody else's fantasy rosters are also able to say the same.
Yeah, physically I'm here. Mentally, I'm not quite sure where I am because, it has been a chaotic day of football all in its own right. And then we have a ton of injuries. Honestly, to some of the biggest players in the league, to guys like Jaden Reed limping off the field at the end of this Packers game. There are injuries left and right to talk about here. We'll get to all of that, and we will follow the structure of our recap show as we do usually here. First segment is the games that we care most about, plus the boom and bust player of the week. Then second segment, it's the games we sort of care about, and then we wrap it up with the games that could have been an email. And somehow, even in those games, there are major takeaways to get into here in the first round of the fantasy football playoffs. But first, let's start it off with our boom player of the week. Trevor Lawrence, 44.3 fantasy points in this game. He threw for 5 touchdowns. He ran for another one. I said this last week, Chris, that Trevor Lawrence, that was probably the best game of his season last week. And look, I realize that it's the Jets defense, so, a little level of competition here, adjusting we might need to do. But nevertheless, this was the best game any quarterback has had in terms of total EPA added on their dropbacks. That includes the scrambles, everything like that. So, man, hats off to Trevor Lawrence. First round of the fantasy football playoffs. If you played him, you got a pretty awesome performance here, 44 points, Chris.
Yeah, and to add on to that, it was the 8th best passing success rate for Lawrence, for his entire career. So to see him play this well, and honestly, I would not to say that we should have seen this coming, but during the earlier parts of the season when it was, how do we handle Brian Thomas Jr. having a step back in his second year? Mm-hmm. What do we think of Travis Hunter trying to get integrated in this offense? And for him to lose both of them, they do the trade for Jacoby Myers. Brenton Strange is on IR. He comes back. And so now with pretty much everybody healthy, this is when we start to see Lawrence start to shine. It kind of makes sense. Again, hindsight being 2020, but at the same time, Lawrence just absolutely balling out, not just from a passing efficiency standpoint, the scrambles as well. 4 scrambles, also putting him at least on top from a rushing standpoint. So overall, it's very good to see Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence starting to click a bit more, especially after some of the sideline shots of seeing them kind of getting into it with each other. So all of that aside, I think it's just more of that level of connection we wanted to see from just the head coach and the play caller and the quarterback, and now also seeing that translate to the quarterback and the wide receivers as well.
As we're showing on the screen right now, Lawrence's 11 completions, 216 yards, and 3 touchdowns on passes of 10-plus air yards were all a career high, according to Next Gen Stats. And, that's what stood out to me in this game was obviously just pushing the ball down the field. You mentioned the name Travis Etienne. He was a recipient of some of those downfield plays. So, again, Jets defense certainly a big part of why this performance happened here today. But I do kind of wonder, and we'll talk about it more when we get to this game, if we are seeing Trevor Lawrence finally get comfortable in Liam Cohen's offense and, the Jacoby Myers factor settling things down in the wide receiver room. If we're, seeing this team and this quarterback, who obviously has been a very, very hit or miss player and mostly missed throughout the course of his career, if we're starting to see him stabilize into maybe not the prince that was promised or whatever he was supposed to be coming into league, but a very, very viable starting NFL quarterback. What goes up must come down. Let's talk about our bust player of the week. It's Quinshon Judkins, 3.2 fantasy points here for Quinshon Judkins, man. I think this one's kind of quiet here, but it was definitely a disappointing outing for Judkins in a game that obviously he got scripted out here because the Browns really weren't competitive. They were trailing with the Bears for most of the afternoon, and I just think Judkins has a really nice schedule, and this was part of that really nice schedule here, this game against the Bears. But I just wonder with the state of the offensive line and just with where the Browns are right now, if he's just going to be a really difficult player to trust down the stretch for fantasy managers.
Because, yeah, I'm with you, because from a volume standpoint, it would seem that he has the entirety of the backfield, right? Jerome Ford on IR, Dylan Sampson was going to be shut down for this game. So from a backfield standpoint, if you're going to tell me that I was going to be rostering a running back that was going to be getting 15, 20 or so carries, or at least touches overall, I would be excited to start them almost independent of the matchup. And in this game, to your point, seeing how, I would say, poorly, just for lack of a better term, poorly that the rest of the offense played, putting Judkins in those negative situations, you can really see how the team chart starts to get away from the running game from a play calling standpoint. And also, like you mentioned, the injuries to the offensive line really puts a lack of rushing lanes for a guy like Judkins, who kind of needs that on top of the volume in order to get there. So hopefully better days ahead for him, but still, I think it's going to be tough sledding, at least from a production standpoint. The volume should be there for Judkins, but again, with the way that the Browns offense has been playing, I mean, he does have one more matchup against my Bengals at some point here soon, so maybe that's the way he can get back into the good graces of the fantasy managers.
Yeah, a good old stoppable force, movable object type outing potentially between Quinshon Judkins and the Bengals defense. Let's get into the games that we care about most from Sunday, and we're going to start with Chargers 16, Chiefs 13. Usually we always talk about the winning team first, but I think we'll make an exception here and throw it to Kansas City, who has been eliminated from playoff contention, I think facing a serious offseason where they got to ask some tough questions, a real look in the mirror offseason coming for Kansas City, and just how they build this team, especially on offense. And to top it all off, on one of the final few plays of the game here, Patrick Mahomes tears his ACL. He is obviously out for the rest of this season, out for the rest of our fantasy football playoffs here, and just the rest of this regular season, because they're not going to the postseason. And they're exploring surgical options was the latest report. Don't know what that means, but Chris, just a multi-level gut punch type of day for the Kansas City Chiefs. And obviously we talk about this as a big injury Sunday. It doesn't get much bigger than Patrick Mahomes tearing his ACL and ending his season.
Yeah, and this seemed like the type of game where I think we were talking earlier today on FF Live of, can the Chiefs try and pull out all of the stops in order for them to at least have a shot at getting into the postseason. And if you just look across the box scores, it seemed like that was going to be the case. Travis Kelce coming in for 9 targets, Rashee Rice, 11 targets. So the pass volume was going to be there, I think, just because Kansas City was trying to get into the postseason. But of course, even there, some of the production throughout that game, you could see it's just so limiting in terms of how little they were able to do after the catch. Even still, I mean, so that's where, even if they were going to pull off this win, their road to going deep into January, or even the shot at getting into the Super Bowl, was something of a long shot. So now they have such a tough road ahead of them. I mean, whether or not Travis Kelce winds up hanging up, what they're going to do with this backfield, even seeing, like watching Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco splitting the carries, neither of them getting more than 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, there's so much about this offense outside of the passing game that really needs to get just restructured, hopefully for 2026 and beyond. That, yeah, I'm with you. There's going to be a lot of tough questions that the Chiefs are going to have to answer. And on top of that, it's just, when is Patrick Mahomes going to be ready for the 2026 season? And hopefully that's going to be the case, and hopefully we'll hear a bit more about his status for 2026. But yeah, tons of questions right now for Kansas City moving into the offseason.
Man, so brutal. And obviously, I think those big picture questions are something we can talk about over the course of the next month here as the season winds down, because I agree with you. It's a lot of complicated questions here. It's not one fix. You know, people will do this, right? They'll come and be like, well, we just got to get rid of Matt Nagy and then that'll fix everything. That's not going to fix everything. In the past, it's been, well, we just got to fix, and the Chiefs themselves have done this. We just got to fix the offensive line and everything else will be fine. That certainly didn't happen this year, even though they really tried to invest into that front five. Tons of injuries on that unit to the point where it's kind of a skeleton crew, like a ghost of what it should have been. But regardless, even when the unit was healthy, it wasn't completely what it needed. They ignored the running back room. I think they've just doubled and tripled down on the same type of wide receivers. Again, we'll have all of these conversations as the next month goes on into the offseason for Kansas City. It's brutal that this team is not going to be in the postseason, and now they face the next few games here without Mahomes. Gardner Minshew is the backup quarterback, in case you forgot, out there for the Kansas City Chiefs. He came in and completed 3 of 5 passes and threw an interception. I mean, I don't know what you want him to do in that situation, but I mean, what's your level of confidence on on guys like Travis Kelce, on guys like Rashee Rice, who both caught 7 passes in this game. Do you think those players can, I mean, I guess we'll call them, do you think they can be PPR scams in the next couple of games of the fantasy season with Gardner Minshew at the helm?
I think that's possible. It's just what else is going to be there for the rest of the teams? Because let's assume that, not to say that we're going to be starting Juju Smith-Schuster or Hollywood Brown, who was out for this matchup, but we'll see if he comes back for week 16. But even if the rest of the going for the rest of the way, it's just what is the rest of the production for that team? Are they even going to be able to move into the opposite team's red zone, or what is that play calling going to look like once they do that? So it's just such a gut punch for the entire Chiefs organization as a whole. It just kind of calls into question, what is this team going to look like now in kind of this shell-shocked mode without having Mahomes under center, really no hope for the postseason. So yeah, from a volume standpoint, yeah, I'll still have Rice and potentially Kelce, depending on what your other options are. Those would be the only 2 guys I'd really trust in my lineup. But with Minshew tossing the ball, it's just the quality of targets. And of course, how often the Chiefs wind up getting into scoring position. That's going to be the real question for me moving forward.
Oh man, it's so crazy. What a kind of tough thing to figure out here. And the next game that they have is against the Titans, right? Like theoretically, we'd be thinking, okay, well, they're not going to make the playoffs, but at least they can take their anger out on this, pitiful Titans team. I'm not sure how excited I can get about that. I'm not going to say the Chiefs are on upset watch with Gardner Minshew next week in Tennessee against the Titans, but yeah, it just feels very deflating for Kansas City right now. So you wonder what the vibe will be around that team as Minshew starts for them next week. Let's talk about the team that won this game. I suppose by math, they did win this game. Justin Herbert. It doesn't really feel like they won this game. Chargers again score 16 points. Chris, Justin Herbert hasn't cleared 6.0 adjusted net yards per attempt for 6 straight games. He was hit 10 times in this game, which is somehow more than he was hit on Monday Night Football against the Eagles when it felt like he was getting blasted left and right. I mean, this Chargers team, it's tough to watch right now, especially on offense. Everything feels really hard. And, we went from being like, man, how are they going to get the ball to all of these wide receivers at the beginning of the season to they can't get the ball to anybody on this team right now.
No, and just even when he does complete passes, it's just the weird stuff that happens afterward. Keenan Allen tries some random lateral at some point during this game, which was, I don't even know what the decision play. I know that could not have been a play call. There was no design to that. So I didn't understand what was going on there. And just I could understand walking into this game, especially with Quentin Johnson being out, a few deep shots at Trey Harris. So those were nice to see, but it's just, even those felt difficult to watch at times. It's just the start, stop, or stuttering portions to this passing game that just makes it somewhat hard to trust on a week in, week out basis. Because I would say, even like we were talking this morning, Ladd McConkey probably popped up as the only Chargers pass game option that we would trust going into this. But even for him, 3 targets in this game, it's kind of falling behind some of those other options, like whether it's just Oronde Gadsden popping up for 5 targets, or like we talked about Trey Harris, even Keandre Lambert-Smith falling into the end zone with a touchdown. It's just this rotation of receivers without anybody truly sticking out from a pass volume standpoint. Again, is just what makes it all the more tough to analyze what is this Chargers offense at this point in the season. Whereas, kind of to your point, through the first month of the season, it was really the only things that we had to worry about was, is it going to be Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, or Ladd McConkey? Those are the only 3 things that we had to worry about, was just, all right, well, how's that target distribution really going to shake out? But now at the back end of the season, I don't think anybody really can trust or wants to roster any of those guys.
Now, it's a great point, and it just all comes back to the fact that they cannot pass protect. They don't really have a plan to adjust for this offensive line right now. I've been really skeptical of what Greg Roman is putting out there from just a design perspective. It's difficult, right? When you're this banged up on the offensive line, you lose 2 what should have been star tackles. It's always going to be tough to adjust to that. But shoot, that happened a long time ago, man. Like I said, it's 6 straight games that Justin Herbert has been under 6.0 adjusted net yards per attempt, which accounts for sacks and everything like that. So it's just a real struggle for this offense. And yet they play the Dallas Cowboys pass defense next week. So I don't know. Maybe we'll be talking about a potential bounce back, but I can't imagine they're going to be able to protect Justin Herbert with Quinnen Williams and the boys getting after him. So, I think if we were still doing coping corner. Ladd McConkey is a coping corner candidate. Justin Herbert is a coping corner candidate. I've got two Justin Herbert teams that may advance past this round of the fantasy football playoffs somehow. And if they do, I'm going to be looking at what do I do with Herbert next week as a potential quarterback start in that Cowboys matchup. Real quick note on the backfield split here. Amari Hampton, 52% of the touches. Kamani Vidal, 42%. Vidal was definitely more involved as the passing down back. He ran way more routes. He played more snaps. What's your thought process on Amari Hampton as a fantasy starter right now, Chris?
It'd be more of if I could see if the Chargers can build a lead or if they can get into some sort of positive game script, which to your point, looking at their upcoming matchups, I mean, especially for week 16, that's a little bit harder to envision. But if it's going to be that type of script, I can see that. But for where they're at right now, and especially because of the pass protection issues, that becomes harder for me to trust a guy like Hampton, where we've seen the utility for Kamani Vidal in that pass game. And for his receiving usage, I would say that Vidal, and also the way that the team is structured right now, Vidal probably shapes up as the better of those two, because you were just saying they played Dallas next week and then the Texans in week 17. Oh. So between those two guys, I think I would probably lean towards Vidal, because I don't see how the Chargers are going to be able to move the ball on the ground, at least because of the two defenses they're going to be facing over these next couple of weeks.
Yo, we need a not safe for work tag for that week 17 Texans defense going against this Chargers offensive line.
Yeah.
Like that, we need to blur some of that out. Okay. There needs to be a parental advisory warning on that particular game. Not going to be a pretty watch for this offense in that one. Let's go to the next game here. Divisional contest once again. Bills 35, Patriots 31. Starting with the Buffalo Bills here. Next Gen Stats notes that the Bills' win probability was as low as 8.9% at one point in their 35-31 comeback win over the New England Patriots to stay in the hunt for the AFC East. And, oh, man, I mean, it did not look good for the Bills in the first half of this game. They went down quick. They were in a hole. Travion Henderson was ripping off explosive runs. Drake May was ripping off explosive runs. And yet Josh Allen really let it rip in the second half. I mean, James Cook was doing his thing throughout the course of the game, but Allen couldn't get anything going in the first half of the game. In the second half, he was really able to let it rip, particularly to the tight ends, who we'll talk about in just a moment. So very impressive moment from Josh Allen. And I think, I don't know that he's going to win MVP back-to-back, because Matthew Stafford and the Rams won today. Obviously, they're going to the postseason. They're the first team to clinch a postseason berth. But he at least gets himself into the conversation if he can come back and win this AFC East title from Drake May and the boys over there.
Yeah, it was kind of odd at the start of the game, because it was 3 drives ending with a punt, and honestly a bizarre decision from Sean McDermott to punt when they were at I think it was like New England 40 or 41. But then afterwards, and Hayden Winks from Underdog, he posted this, after those 3 punts, it was 7 plays and a touchdown, 6 plays and a touchdown, essentially 5 straight touchdown drives after that early sequence from the Bills. And I can understand the case for Josh Allen from an MVP standpoint now, seeing that he has the comeback win last week against some team, don't know who that was, but now this week seeing the same thing again, where we're not seeing the level of, I would say, help from a pass game standpoint from his pass catching core, where we're still getting these like 3 or 4 or 5 targets to Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman really showing up as a 0 from the wide receiver 2 standpoint. And it really is just the production to the tight ends and maybe and also a little bit of work from James Cook that's kind of cementing how this offense continues to claw itself back in the game. So, and all that comes back to Josh Allen. And so seeing how well he's been able to play so far, especially over these past 2 weeks, but ultimately over the course of the entire season, it really kind of hones in on how well this Bills offense has been playing. And of course, I mean, the path for them to really be a force if they wind up getting into the postseason for sure.
Yeah, this passing game is just a complete rotation now among the pass catchers. I mean, Khalil Shakir leads the way with 79% route participation, 27 routes here in this one. Keon Coleman is second at 55.9% and doesn't even get a target in this game. Gabe Davis, obviously not heard from. Brandon Cooks runs 14 routes, does not catch a pass. Josh Palmer runs 16 routes, gets 2 targets, catches one of them. It really is obviously Khalil Shakir doing everything that we are, familiar with him doing as that short area slot receiver. But it is really the tight ends at this point stepping up. You've got Dawson Knox here with 3 for 37 and 2 touchdowns. Dalton Kincaid, 3 for 34 as well. Jackson Hawes chips in with 1 catch for 9 yards. And we'll see, if they can continue to get away with this on offense. But man, I love what they've got going in this tight end room right now. I do think there's some sustainability here. Dalton Kincaid is making plays down the field, and Dawson Knox has emerged as a real big-time weapon around the scoring area. So, Chris, I think, if you're in a tough spot, Dawson Knox obviously maybe is a nice punt play at tight end based on what he's been doing the last few weeks, and Dalton Kincaid has been very efficient all throughout the course of the season.
See, and I was almost wondering why they didn't try and make this their offensive identity after they drafted Dalton Kincaid, in terms of let's make this a more power run, 2 tight end type of offense where you see Kincaid and Knox essentially splitting the usage. I mean, both of them ran around 45-50% of the routes, also 4 targets apiece. So if you have these types of guys that, from Kincaid's standpoint, more of that receiving tight end, Knox can play somewhat in line and can be your blocker plus, like he has that receiving ability as well. But then you have a Khalil Shakir, then maybe you have a guy that plays some of that sacrificial X type of work, so to kind of draw defensive attention away. This could have been their identity all along, but trying to, figure out what their rotation is going to be at wide receiver has kind of painted him into this corner. So I agree with you that this couldn't be their identity, and there's some sustainability to moving forward. I just hope that maybe next season and years moving forward, this is something that they really try and stick to, in terms of saying, we'll draft this wide receiver Keon Coleman with an early round pick, or we'll try and get these other free agents that you might be interested in that have had some buzz in the past, or whether it's the Josh Palmer's of the world or whatever. Let's stick to this because clearly this is working for them. It works for Josh Allen. And then afterwards, I guess, especially from a selfish fantasy portion, or from a selfish fantasy perspective, it becomes easier for us trying to figure out week in and week out, okay, where are these targets going to go? What can we expect from this offense? And I think this seems to be the working formula for the Bills.
On the other side of the field here, the New England Patriots, really, again, I think they let this one slip because they couldn't get the downfield passing game going, because otherwise they ran on this Bills team. I mean, even Ramondre Stevenson, 8.3 yards per carry. Drake May, 10.8 yards per carry. And it was Traven Henderson with 2 50-plus yard rushing touchdowns. He now has 4 50-plus yard rushing touchdowns this season. Just incredible stuff. 14 games into his rookie season, he is up there with like Saquon Barkley and Chris Johnson in terms of most career games with multiple 50-plus rushing touchdowns, because he obviously did it in the Bucs win early on this year. So congratulations if you had Traven Henderson and you played him in fantasy. He had 14 carries, but he averaged over 10 yards a carry, including those 2 touchdowns. Yeah,
and so that you could almost look at the Patriots offense and see some of the similarities between how those two are structured. You've got your tall, mobile quarterback that can do things both through the air and on the ground. You have a solid running game, whether it's swapping James Cook for Travion Henderson. I mean, there was similar, even from a pass catching standpoint. You have a bunch of guys that are more or less your part-time players. Even Stephon Diggs in this one, around 15 routes. I mean, around 50% of the routes like for this team. And you have your deep threat in Kayshon Boutte and Mac Hollins also pitching in as well, but not an established wide receiver one, that go-getter or the guy that can essentially, if the team needs a bucket, that's where Drake May is going to go with the ball. They don't really have that yet. And so that's where you could see some of the pitfalls of the Patriots offense once they got into third down, obvious passing situations, because it was Josh Allen with his through the passes to Khalil Shakir or even the tight ends, 7 attempts in obvious passing situations, 6 completions and 4 first downs. And he also ran for a few himself. Whereas for Drake May, didn't have the same level of mobility, even though that's a tool that he has in his tool bag, but also having to throw to, again, Mac Hollins, Kayshon Boutte, some of those other guys, not able to come up with those same big plays to keep the Patriots offense out on the field. So I think that at least at this point in his career, or like where the Patriots offense stands at right now, it becomes tougher for us to try and start each of those guys on a week in, week out basis. That I just want to trust maybe Drake May, Travion Henderson, and outside of that, without the usage, I can't see myself trying to start any of these guys moving forward.
Yeah, I've said it all year. It's really been tough to guess the Diggs game. I thought this might be a moment when he'd get a bump in playing time coming off a bye, big, important game, and it did not happen here. So I agree with Chris. It's just really tough to figure out the distribution of this passing game right now, which means you really can't trust any of these players. And even for Travion Henderson, I say like they ran on this Bills team, I believe his second, the 65-yard rushing touchdown. He truly ran into the line like there was no hole there, and he completely reversed course. And then him and Drake May running down the field together in order to score that long 65-yard rushing touchdown. So that wasn't even within the phase of the play, but he's a playmaker. He made that play, so shout out to him. Next game up here, Rams 41, Lions 34. On the Rams side of this, man, it was an electric offensive performance. I mean, this game lived up to the bill here. This was, I believe, the highest over-under of the entire season. We soared way past the projected point total of 55 here. For the Rams side of it, both running backs, this is a point you've been making for a while, Chris, that you can play both of these guys. Both Kyren Williams and Blake Corum cleared 70 yards on the ground. They split 3 touchdowns between them. Kyren Williams had 2, Blake Corum had 1, and the passing game did what they did. Obviously, there was one early interception for Matthew Stafford to Aiden Hutchinson, but after that, it was pretty much they got whatever they want, including 2 touchdowns to Colby Parkinson.
Yeah, both Rams running backs with a plus 70% rushing success rate in this game. I mean, everything was there for both of them from a rushing standpoint. But of course, it was Kyren Williams getting those short touchdowns like earlier in the game, and then Blake Corum either ripping off a long run here and there. I think he had a long run around 20, 25 yards. And of course, he gets the score too. So this is complimentary football, at least from an offensive standpoint, where you have Matthew Stafford, who has been dealing to both of his primary wide receivers. We'll get to those injuries here in just a second. But really, for me, that focus has been on how well this backfield has been operating from an efficiency standpoint. And I'd almost try and look at them. I don't know if I can tempt it again, because the Rams, I mean, they do have, I'd say, a little bit tougher of an out next week going up against the Seahawks. So they have another divisional matchup there. But still, I mean, with how well this offense has been designed, and if you are looking for at least a little bit of help at the RB2 position, Kyren Williams for sure, but then Blake Corum as a flex option, I still kind of dig it for sure.
In the passing game, Colby Parkinson, I mentioned he scored 2 touchdowns. He also led the team with 30 routes. Now, there were injuries at the wide receiver position, but that does just kind of put into clear context that he is the number 1 tight end on this team, although Terrence Ferguson, the rookie tight end, was only 1 route away from him. I just think that Parkinson is the more trusted player right now. On those wide receiver injuries, Puka Nacua, I believe, had some cramps at one point, so he was in and out of the game, but he came back in, finished fine. He had 181 yards on 9 catches, 11 targets to lead the team there. Devontae Adams, a little bit more problematic. He had 71 yards in this game on 9 targets. However, McVay said after the game, Devontae Adams, who looked like he pulled up with a hamstring injury at one point, and remember, he was dealing with the hamstring injury coming into this game, said, quote, "It didn't look good," and the wide receiver status for Thursday Night Football against the Seahawks is in doubt. McVay did say, I certainly wouldn't rule him out yet, but he did come off a little pessimistic about the injury and Adams' potential availability on a short week here.
Yeah, and that one looked bad watching it live, because you could just see Adams pull up lame about 2/3 of the way through the route, and then just the ball wound up sailing maybe an extra 5 to 10 yards down the field. So I would be, especially on the short week, I would be somewhat surprised if he's available, but it's at least good to see that Puka Nacua was able to come back, because in the moment, that one also almost looked worse with him laying there on the field, but then they saw the reports of him walking under his own power in the tunnel. Then we get the report of cramps later on during the live broadcast, and he comes back. So let's assume that Devontae Adams doesn't make it back. I mean, Tutu Atwell, outside of the tight ends, Tutu Atwell, he had a nice snag down the right sideline for a first down. A couple other catches there too. So I would say that if you are in a pinch, he wouldn't be my first option, but with how well Matthew Stafford has been playing and also the receivers that have been attached to him, if you want to throw a Hail Mary dart throw, I think Tutu Atwell is at least viable, I would say, for week 16.
Lions side of things here, their defense is so banged up right now that I think they're going to be in a lot of these potential high-flying affairs here. And although week 16, they do play the Pittsburgh Steelers, and week 17, they play the Minnesota Vikings. So maybe I want to walk that back just a little bit. We'll see. We'll see if those offenses can actually participate in a high-flying affair. But we know that their offense can do that, and they absolutely did it in this one. They didn't win this game. The running game was non-existent. If we had done our bust segment of the week, we'd usually take those from the early games. I think if we had accumulated all the games here, we probably would have mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs' name in there, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Man, Jared Goff lighting it up to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams here. He had, I think I saw a Next Gen Stats note, he had 229 passing yards just on in-breaking routes alone in this game. And it felt like it, man. Constantly crossers, digs. And again, it's not just to St. Brown, who was incredibly productive in this game, but it was also to Jameson Williams, who has been, really heavily involved ever since. Again, you can either chalk it up to Dan Campbell took the play calling over. You can also chalk it up to Sam Laporta got hurt, or you could chalk it up to both because that happened essentially in the same week here. But one way or another, Jameson Williams has been a guy that really hurt you in the first half of the season to one of the guys you really, really want here as the season begins to come to a close.
And honestly, as I was watching the Rams game against the Panthers a couple of weeks ago and seeing it was Jalen Coker, the speedy wide receiver for the Panthers that just smoked Emmanuel Forbes for a deep touchdown, I was almost thinking for this specific game, I think Jameson Williams is going to dunk on this dude. I can already see this happening. And that's exactly what happened here. It's that same archetype of receiver where if you have the speed to get past their first line of defense, this is the type of performance that you can get. So while it was the scheme design, hitting some of both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams on those crossing routes, I mean, just having just the athleticism to get by their defenders and beating them for some of those explosive plays, that's what you're seeing here. So I can, honestly, that's probably the biggest weakness to the Rams defense as of right now, because again, trying to keep Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery mostly bottled up in this game is a task in and of itself, but it's just the back end of the defense. If you do have that speed in order to try and test their corners deep, I mean, they can definitely beat them for some long games, and we saw that, if not from Amon-Ra, but definitely from Jameson Williams too.
I'm just not used to seeing a Lions team like this get completely physically outmatched on the line of scrimmage, and that's what's happening. And that's the deal with Jahmyr Gibbs right now. If he doesn't bust a long play, if he doesn't basically make chicken salad out of what, the run game goes nowhere. They do not have a good, efficient, punch you in the mouth run game as they had previously. And some of that is because change in coordinator. Obviously, I think the run game doesn't look as dynamic as it did last year with Ben Johnson. We obviously see what Ben Johnson is doing with the Chicago Bears right now, but it's also mostly just due to personnel changeover along the offensive line and then injuries on top of that. So it's just, I know we're putting this on the screen here from Ian Hartitz, our buddy, that it's every other week kind of with Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of he either wins you your week or gives you a normal game. But then there have been a couple of these duds, and this was definitely a dud here. So nothing you can do about it, really, with Jahmyr Gibbs. You're going to absolutely play him next week against the Steelers. And again, maybe he has one of the, if you survive this week, maybe he has a 30, 40 point banger, but it's just where this team is from an offensive line standpoint right now, that this run game is not the set your watch by it unit as it was previously. My last question for you, Chris, on this game, were you aware that Jameson Williams and Kyren Williams are first cousins? Because I was not aware of this. The Lions Twitter account, I know nobody cares about this, but I find this fascinating. The Lions Twitter account tweeted out, family reunion before the game, and it was a picture of Kyren Williams and Jameson Williams. It's like, what? What? And so I looked it up, and yeah, they're first cousins. Didn't know that.
I did not know that.
That is your random piece of trivia for the day here. I didn't know that. They're very different, who knows, whatever, but they're very different players too. Kyren is this, kind of grinder, not physically overwhelming presence, but he's just a smart player, does everything right. He's not the fastest back in the world, and Jameson Williams might be the fastest receiver in the NFL. I mean, not that you need to be the same athletic presence of your family or anything. You're just cousins, whatever. Again, I'm struggling to compute this information because I was not aware of it.
No, I wasn't aware of that either, and that's crazy trying to think about it now. But yeah, I did not know that. That's cool. I mean, good for them, and they were able to actually do that whole get together or whatever after the game and whatnot. But still, no, I did not know that. Huh.
The Williams family combined for 3 touchdowns in this very high flying affair. So shout out to the Williams cousins in this one. All right, last game here in this section, Broncos 34, Packers 26. Again, usually we start with the winning team, but if we gave this treatment to the Chiefs, I think we got to give it to the Packers here, because if the Chiefs lost, potentially arguably one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the NFL, and Patrick Mahomes, The Packers fear to believe that they have lost one of the best defensive players in the NFL here. Micah Parsons, again, believed to have suffered a torn ACL against the Broncos, according to Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. That is the fear right now. Does need to get an MRI to confirm that. It was a non-contact injury for the Packers, which is a bummer. The other bummer is that this is not even the only injury news for the Packers in this one. Christian Watson, who had been playing the best football of his career, comes down hard on, I think it was his left shoulder, right? I don't know, one of the shoulders, potentially. I think it was the left. It comes down, looked like he got on his left shoulder there for a pass to Patrick Surtain, ultimately intercepted. He was ruled out with a chest injury and later left the stadium in an ambulance, according to James Palmer. Tackle Zach Tom also got injured here. Like, these are three of the best players on the Packers roster. All three of them suffer serious injuries here. So, Chris, just brutal day for the Packers. Not only do you lose this one, but you lose a guy in Micah Parsons who is a transformative talent, and a guy in Christian Watson who had been playing some excellent football in their wide receiver room.
Right. And we talked about this at least over the past couple of weeks as we've seen Watson ascend into that wide receiver one role, that he essentially fits the style that Jordan Love likes to play, right? He runs those deep crossers and also just those go routes and those verticals down the field that for a guy like Jordan Love that wants to hit those throws off of his back foot, huck it down the field for 15 to 20 air yards a pop. Watson really did fit into how like Love is trying to play at this point in his career. So seeing him lose that on top of already, the Tucker Kraft injury from almost like a month and a half ago. This is now a team that now has to reconfigure or try and reassert itself or try and figure out what its new offensive identity is going to be, because beforehand it was explosives to Tucker Kraft, maybe take a couple of shots to Romeo Doubs and figure out like what's going to happen afterwards. Well, then you lose Tucker Kraft. Watson comes back into the picture. All right, we can still do some of the same things we were trying to do, but now like on top of that, we actually have some of these other ancillary pieces to it. Jaden Reed comes back, and like you mentioned earlier, he comes away from this game limping as well. So it's just they didn't have to rely on Luke Musgrave to fill in for Tucker Kraft. You didn't really have to see too much from these other pass catchers, whether it's Dontavian Wicks popping up for a couple of games here and there. But now you have to reconfigure this entire offense at this point in the season where we thought they were essentially going to waltz into the postseason. So I'm somewhat concerned about what this is going to look like, especially now that we're in the back end of the fantasy season and, of course, the regular season for the Packers. So, yeah, a lot of concerns and a lot of, I would say, questions that we're going to have to answer about Jordan Love and the rest of this offense for at least the next couple of weeks or so.
Packers still have a 93% chance to make the playoffs, according to the Athletics playoff simulator, but only a 51% chance to win the division. Of course, they play the Bears next week, and that will go a long way to deciding who ultimately wins the NFC North. On the Broncos side of this, huge hats off to Bo Nix. He balled out in this game, and look, Bo has been very up and down this year, and that has just been obvious to anyone watching this with objective eyes that there's been some good, but there's been some bad for Bo Nix here. He diced up the Packers zone coverage. And this wasn't like, oh, Micah Parsons went out on the first drive. Micah Parsons went out late in this game. So Bo Nix was doing it even with the best defensive player on the Packers roster on the other side of the field. According to Next Gen Stats, Bo Nix faced zone coverage on 89% of his dropbacks. Third consecutive game he's faced zone at above 89%. And he completed 20 of 30 passes for 267 yards, the second most of his career against zone coverage, and all 4 of his touchdowns. This has been a struggle for Bo. He doesn't always, it's like not always within the rhythm. It's not always within the timing. He really struggles against zone coverage, or has at times this year. It's mostly been, man coverage, just kind of point it to a spot and rip it to, Cortland Sutton or Troy Franklin on some of the speed slot stuff. But he really diagnosed and solved this defense here. Huge performance from Bo Nix in week 15.
Yeah, it's 0.57 EPA per dropback. That has to be a top 3 mark on his career. Definitely a top mark for him this entire season. And to your point, the struggles that he's had against zone defense was one of the reasons why I thought this was going to be more of a down game, if not for him, than any of the pass catchers that we would want to at least trust to start, whether it's Cortland Sutton after he popped up for 10 targets last week, or even Troy Franklin that, again, has had at least forced that conversation of whether he's the wide receiver 1A, 1B, somewhere in there during the middle parts of the year. I want to stay from this entire passing game, but seeing that development from him, at least in this game alone, where, under pressure on over 30% of his dropbacks, and seeing how well he was able to adjust to that pressure and hit like either 7 or 8 different pass catchers in this game. I mean, yeah, hats off to him, Sean Payton for the play calling, and of course the rest of his pass catchers for being able to execute on this in this game. So yeah, I'm very encouraged for where we're seeing Bo Nix, at least from a development standpoint. And I've heard a lot of folks say it across the league where progression or development isn't linear. Sometimes it takes time for quarterbacks in order to figure out how best to approach each situation. And it seems like, at least for this game, something was able to click for Nix and how well he was able to play against these Packers defense.
Other note on the Broncos here, R.J. Harvey, who had 19 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown in this tough matchup. No big explosive runs here, long run of 8 yards, but he was the only running back that got the ball here. Jaleel McLaughlin had 2 carries. That was it. It was the R.J. Harvey show. He has a rib injury, so something to monitor there. Don't have an update on that, but that obviously will be worth tracking as he goes into these next couple of difficult matchups here on his schedule. But again, good for him to get out of this game with a solid performance if you started him in fantasy football. All right, that does it for the games we care most about. Now let's get to the games we sort of care about here, starting with Chris. I'm sorry, buckle up here. Ravens 24, Bengals stone cold 0. The Ravens win this game despite the fact that Lamar Jackson threw just 12 passes. Derrick Henry ran the ball 11 times, and they won with ease. They did have a pick 6 where Kyle Van Noy, ultimate teammate move, just passed the football off to the safety and just let him run it in for the touchdown there. But yeah, bizarre game where, you don't come away with any smash performance from any of the Ravens offensive players, but they win the game with ease, Chris.
Yeah, and multiple explosive plays. I saw at least 3 from Derrick Henry. Keaton Mitchell gets in a long run. Rasheen Ali, he was the one that had their first touchdown on a short pass that he took for about 30-plus yards. Flowers mixing in. It was a lot of just explosive plays, none of the same down-to-down efficiency where we've seen the Bengals defense get just diced up by opposing defenses. There's a lot of these 10 yards from 10-yard pass or whatever, or 10-plus yard pass from Lamar Jackson to Zay Flowers, a 20-plus yard run from Derrick Henry, scramble for 10-plus yards for Lamar Jackson. So it was just chunks versus a lot of the, again, just short passes or whatever that we've seen previous weeks. So the surprising part, though, was nothing from the tight ends. I mean, not even a target to Isaiah Likely, who I know a lot of folks started thinking this was going to be the matchup that, all right, finally, he catches a pass in the end zone and it actually stands for a touchdown after the last 2 weeks of getting nothing from Likely, at least in that particular regard. Not even a target in this matchup, and even just the 3 targets to Mark Andrews, didn't see a ton of production from Andrews either. So it was like, if you had told me after the game, and I had no idea what happened, and you had told me that Lamar Jackson had less than 200 passing yards, almost no production to the tight ends, I would have assumed that the Bengals had won. But of course, everything goes wrong for the Bengals offense on top of everything else. So yeah, just a bizarre game. But of course, the Ravens find a way to completely shut out the Bengals and of course shut down any hopes of them making into the postseason.
Yeah, just unlikely before we go to the Bengals. He ran 11 routes in this game, which was second on the team. Zay Flowers led the way with 17 routes. So it's just not a lot of opportunity for anybody to do anything on this Ravens roster. Zay Flowers at least escaped with a touchdown here, his first touchdown since week 1. And he could have had a second. He dropped it on a kind of a tough catch, but definitely one that he needs to bring in there as well. Let's talk about your Bengals here, Chris. And I don't really know what to say about any of the statistical performances in this one. Maybe you're disappointed that, and I say maybe because I am one of these people that played Mike Gesicki here, and I'm disappointed that he had just 1 catch for 11 yards. But other than that, kind of business as usual from a production standpoint. Other than Joe Burrow, they score 0 points. That's obviously a little unusual. I just kind of want to ask you about what seems to be discontent setting in among this Bengals team right now. Jamar Chase was asked after the game if he would make any changes in the offseason, or if, and he said, if I had say so, it probably would be something, but I only can control what I can control. Jamar often says just whatever's on his mind. He's a pretty straightforward guy, but you've also got Joe Burrow, kind of giving some odd quotes that people, maybe blew out of proportion this past week. But just what's your feeling on the vibe around Cincinnati right now? Because I think that might be more important to talk about than, oh yeah, Jamar Chase has 100 catches for the 3rd straight year, or Chase Brown continues to get a bunch of checkdowns, whatever.
at least for me, and this is all subjective. This is me being the hurt and distressed fan of the Cincinnati Bengals at this point. It's just more about how little they're able to get when at least you have Joe Burrow and let's say one of the pass catchers, because we've seen games without Jamar Chase in the lineup. We've seen games without T. Higgins in the lineup, and still it always becomes so hard for them to create anything. And it's just the margins have been so thin for the Bengals offense for years now, it feels. And whether it's losing because the team has to score 40 points to win because the defense can't get a stop, or even when Joe Burrow doesn't play to his absolute ceiling, they tend to struggle. There hasn't been enough complementary football for them to pull out any wins. And so my kind of thing is there just needs to be a change in the play calling. A lot of folks at this point are trying to at least lean on the narrative that Joe Burrow needs these two top-end pass catchers in order to do anything from a passing production standpoint. And while the numbers might at least support some of those ideas, I would also say that, is it a sense of you should still be able to create a viable pass game with Jamar Chase as your wide receiver one and whichever tight ends and running backs and even the wide receiver twos that they have, because we've seen other offenses being able to do this as well. Not every other passing game features like these two top end wide receivers. So my hope would be that this is something that they try and address over the offseason, maybe a removal of Zach Taylor, at least from a play calling standpoint. They get some fresh ideas into the building, and this is a way that they can start to at least hone back in on how well like this offense is. Because, yeah, if a lot of the narratives over the previous offseason that, well, T. Higgins could be anybody's wide receiver one or at least a high-end wide receiver two elsewhere. So if we're leaning on this idea that both Jamar and T are wide receiver ones and Joe Burrow is at least I would say top 10 to top 12 option from a quarterback standpoint, then this should be this high-end passing game that defense has to plan against. But again, it always just feels like everything feels so much tougher for this team. And if I can't always say that it's just because of the talent they have on the field, I have to look to some of the play calling. And with the way they're looking right now, 5 targets to Jamar in obvious passing situations, and between Mike Gesicki, Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson, Mitchell Tinsley, we really can't get anything else out of this offense. At least for me, that raises a lot more questions about how this play calling and the coaching and how that is done versus what I'm seeing from a talent standpoint on the field.
I think those are all really good points, and definitely something that we'll discuss as this season moves on for the Bengals, and as we get into the kind of coach hiring cycle. Will the Bengals make any changes there? I think we'll talk about those for the rest of the fantasy season. Got some good games here coming up potentially to bounce back. They got the Dolphins and they got the Cardinals, so hopefully we can see some more fantasy fireworks from this offense as we wrap up the regular season here. Next game up here, Jaguars 48, Jets 20. 5 players so far before Sunday Night Football. 6 players have scored 30 or more fantasy points in half PPR scoring. 2 of them are Jaguars on the week. One is Trevor Lawrence, as I mentioned earlier, 44.3 points. Travis Etienne, he went crazy as a receiver, caught 3 touchdowns as a receiver in this game, in addition to some work on the ground as well. It was an offensive eruption here in a soft spot for the Jaguars, which, listen, if you're going to be a good team, you're going to go to the playoffs, you need to dunk on the bad teams. And that is what the Jacksonville Jaguars did here in this one.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence was an absolute menace on play action. 9 of 13 for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns off play action passes. Whew. Talked earlier about how well he was as a scrambler and him getting into the end zone, also as a rusher. So seeing him, again, starting to have a bit more, I would say, rapport, maybe buy-in, trust, whatever descriptor you want to apply to where he's at in terms of being on the same page with Liam Cohen, and of course seeing all that translate down to the wide receivers from Jacoby Myers, Brian Thomas getting into the end zone. 25% target rate for Brian Thomas Jr. Seeing him hit Thomas on that drag route across the field for the touchdown to BTJ, I thought was pretty smooth and a good indication about where Thomas could potentially be at moving forward, if not over the last few weeks of the season, but maybe we see him pop up a bit more for some larger gains in the postseason. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about where this offense is at, especially given kind of the narratives and discussion around the team and potentially the use your word, discontent that we might have thought about applying to this team once like in the earlier parts of the season too.
Yeah, really good to see Brian Thomas Jr. pop up for that touchdown. Had a couple of good plays here, mostly on the type of routes that you kind of want to see Brian Thomas Jr. being used on. And Jacoby Myers continues to set the tone in the wide receiver room with 71 yards. That was second most on the team, only behind Travis Etienne. On the Jets side of things here, I know the final stat line looks abysmal for Brady Cook. 52 pass rating, 5.3 yards per attempt, 3 interceptions. I swear he was like acceptable at the start of this game. I mean, they were immediately in a 14-0 hole. The train just came off the rails at the end for Brady Cook, which is about what you'd expect. But at least if you had to play Adonai Mitchell, he was Brady Cook's guy. 9 targets, a lot on go routes, stop routes, and a deep out route I saw as well, and he scored a touchdown here.
Yeah, I think that's really the only thing I could take away from the Brady Cook experience is that 33 passing attempts, so I'm kind of happy, or at least almost surprised that Aaron Glenn let him rip the ball that many times, but game script being what it was, I can get behind that. But still, he knows where his bread is buttered from a pass game perspective. I mean, the 9 targets that you mentioned in A.D. Mitchell, and between like Isaiah Williams popping up also for 7 targets, but at least if you were rostering, whether it was A.D. Mitchell, trying to get a bit more from John Mechie, even now with Isaiah Williams, who ran around 75% of his snaps from the slot, he does kind of pop up as I would say, the safety valve for that dump off target. So let's see if that usage continues in week 16. But A.D. Mitchell should at least be the, I would say, wide receiver, low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3, somewhere in there, at least given the volume from Brady Cook, at least for right now.
Next game up here, Saints 20, Panthers 17. Nobody wants to win the NFC South. Apparently, nobody wants to win the NFC South. Chris Olave, if you watched every single target here, it wasn't always pretty, but he ultimately came away with a pretty good game, as did Devon Vele. Continues to step up for this team in the post-Brandon Cooks world. Almost just makes you wonder, like, what was the point of having Brandon Cooks on the roster? Like, you just kind of progress stopped a guy that you made a pretty significant trade for in August, who has made some moments here. Devin Neal, a player people were interested in from a fantasy standpoint. He left this game with an injury at one point. Don't know if we have an update on that. But, yeah, the Saints upset an NFC South rival once again to essentially put this division into just the hands of who wants to win that game between the Bucs and the Panthers, the two we've got here at the end of the game, because I mean, they don't really seem to want to win any of their other games, but maybe they will. Somebody's got to win the game against each other, although I guess perhaps they could tie.
Yeah, and Shuck continues to make some moves out there in the open field, although wound up having to make a couple of trips to the blue tent after some tough hits there. But seeing him also be able to put up a few passes to the guys that we want, whether it's Juwan Johnson and, of course, Chris Olave, Devin Neal mixing in for a few targets, too, before he left that game with a hamstring injury. Shuck really does have it all from a passing standpoint, but it's almost the same questions that we're having with Jackson Dart, and that game we'll get to later, about, like, how are you playing this game? Are you playing it well enough that you're going to be able to be available for the next week? Because for as often as Shuck is now putting his body in harm's way, I believe it was 9 attempts this game between design rushes and scrambles, it's, are you going to be able to continue playing the game the way that at least getting the attention from the rest of the league and, of course, fantasy managers? So, yeah, exciting to see how well he's playing, but still at the same time, it's like we kind of need you out there on the field so that we're getting enough targets to Chris Olave, we're getting enough targets to Juwan Johnson, and so on and so forth. So, again, strong performance, but yeah, how about you just chill a little bit, man? Just maybe slide a little bit, or maybe get out of bounds a bit faster, those types of things. I prefer that.
Yeah, we don't need to see Spencer Rattler back under center. I mean, Rattler was solid this year, but the Saints fans need to figure out if Tyler Shuck is their guy. He did win this game, as we said, so good sign for his rookie season. On the Panthers side of things, one of the bigger fantasy stories was coming out of the bye. What was the backfield going to look like? Despite picking up an injury early in this game, Rico Dowdle finished with 17 touches to 9 for Chuba Hubbard. They both ran 14 routes here, so there wasn't any like, oh, Chuba Hubbard was the pass down guy. In snaps, Rico led the way. It was a split backfield for sure. They really tried to establish that thing. And Chuba had a couple of nice moments in this game. But Rico Dowdle was back in the saddle as the lead back for the Panthers, Chris.
Yeah, which was something of a surprise, especially for how well that Hubbard wound up playing in that Rams game before their bye. So something to definitely monitor moving forward. But at least, again, in this game going up against the Saints defense, there was some level of viability to start both of them, almost like that Rams discussion we were having earlier. But now moving ahead, I mean, looking at Carolina's like next couple of matchups, Tampa Bay, who typically does have a fairly tough run defense, and of course Seattle in week 17. So if you are rostering either one of those two, even now, especially with that split backfield, it does become a bit tougher to trust either of those two guys, if not from a volume standpoint, but definitely from a production standpoint, given the next two matchups.
Disappointing outing for Tetero McMillan coming out of the bye. This is a good matchup for him, and he had a play that just went off his hands where he could have just waltzed right into the end zone. Defender kind of had his arms in the way there, but you want to see McMillan make that catch. Jalen Coker did win another go route deep down the sideline as an outside receiver, so good to see for him, although he's kind of a deeper play in fantasy at best right now. Final game of this segment here. Seahawks 18, Colts 16. A battle of field goals at the end ultimately spoils the Phillip Rivers comeback win here. The Seahawks, they don't score a touchdown in this one. Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is inevitable, goes over 100 yards. And again, they just escape here as Phillip Rivers kind of took them to the brink, I suppose. But yeah, Seahawks eventually get the win at home.
And I was wondering about this game coming into it, how the Colts were going to try and at least keep Rivers upright enough in order for them to sustain drives. And kind of my thought going into it was, all right, well, Daniel Jones, especially over the first 3 months of the season, he was actually was either 11th or 12th in terms of drop back rate, where he was getting the ball out quickly. His quick game drop back rate was around like 41, 42%. And so that's where we saw Rivers, especially, 2.41 average time to throw. He was just gripping it and ripping it. To the guys that we especially expected him to get the ball to. So I'm not, let's say, as concerned about, let's say, the Josh Downs of the world because he wound up getting the end zone. Even Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren to some extent. It's just, while it was good to see Alec Pierce in that final comeback attempt for them, kind of get a few of those passes for them to continue to move the chains, it's those types of guys that I could see more as the wide receiver threes, the more of the deeper plays, whereas some of those other guys that run the short area A-dot stuff, those are the guys I would have a bit more trust in from a passing game standpoint, from Phillip Rivers moving forward.
It's hard to know what to say about Rivers in this one because we all saw what it looked like. He hasn't played football in 5 years. Okay.
Yeah.
He looks like he hasn't played football in 5 years, but both like physically and which is no shame. I would look like that too if I was.
Did you see that pregame shot of him, the pregame warm-up shot of him walking around? Okay. He looked like he's been, he's enjoying retirement. He was, at least.
Yeah. He looks like he's been retired for 5 years because he's been retired for 5 years. Like that. That's what he looks like. He looks like a guy who hasn't played football in 5 years, which is, again, no shame. That's what he should look like. He should be enjoying his life. Right. I don't know if he should be playing the Seattle Seahawks defense in week 15, but he did. And again, we saw what the game looked like here for Phillip Rivers. The only quarterbacks who had a lower air yards per attempt than Phillip Rivers was friggin' Kenny Pickett in a game that lasted 15 seconds, it felt like, and CJ Stroud in a game that the Texans controlled for the most part. Amir Abdullah led the team in catches and yards in this one. Is that going to happen next week when they play the Niners, which is certainly an easier matchup? I'm assuming Rivers is going to start next week as well. I imagine he's going to start the rest of the way. It's just like a good story now. The Colts aren't going to go to the playoffs or anything, so he's just kind of doing his buddy a favor here in Shane Steichen by being around. And, that's cool. Like, great. If that's what he wants to do, if he wants to reset his health insurance for his kids by becoming an NFL player again, like, awesome. Yeah. Totally great. But I think from our standpoint, like when we're making lineup decisions about these wide receivers and stuff, Amir Abdullah coming away leading the team in catches and receiving yards is probably not what you want to see. One thing we did see in this game on the Seahawks side of it, Rashid Shaheed, 2 solid weeks back to back here, and he actually had a bump in routes this week. I believe it was the first time all season since he was traded to the Seahawks that he has run more routes than Cooper Kupp. So it didn't have a crazy performance or anything, but something to note as we've talked about that trade a bit here on the show. All right, that does it for the games that we sort of care about. Now let's get into the games that could have been an email. We'll rapid fire through these 5 contests because they were not very competitive. Starting with 49ers 37, Titans 24. A lot of good performances here on the 49ers offense. Jawan Jennings scored twice. Christian McCaffrey did his thing. George Kittle did his thing. Even Ricky Pearsall had over 90 receiving yards despite getting hurt on his first catch and his last catch of the game. He will have to get knee imaging, I suppose, is what Kyle Shanahan said after the game. So even in one of the Ricky Pearsall good games, can't come away without talking about 2 injuries, I guess, or maybe just the same one.
Right. And then as we were talking during this morning in FF Live, it's what is Brock Purdy going to look like coming out of the bye, because we hadn't really seen some of the scrambling and just, I would say, the sneaky mobility that Brock Purdy offers, but now see him get over 40 rushing yards in this game. I would say he's fully back from a health standpoint. And so now being able to connect with all of his receivers, assuming Pearsall is going to be healthy and available for week 16 and also like throughout the, like going into the postseason. I mean, this 49ers offense, the defense is not as great, but still the offense and the way they're looking right now, I mean, that's pretty potent passing game for Brock Purdy and company for sure.
And obviously a good matchup here against the Titans for that defense. So Ricky Pearsall being able to dunk on them for downfield passes was a little bit expected, even if it's tough to trust him in fantasy, given how things went in the 3 games before the bye. I mean, on the Titans, it's just Tony Pollard is one of the ultimate troll jobs in fantasy this season.
Yeah.
Does essentially nothing, and now he's balled out 2 games in a row. Don't really know what to do with that information. But for the Dynasty Bros, Gunnar Helm did score a touchdown in this one. He is a player to watch going forward. Next game up here, Texans 40, Cardinals 20. The Texans got on to the Cardinals right away thanks to a Nico Collins long catch and run. Nico had a big game here with 2 touchdowns. We had a shakeup in the Texans backfield as Woody Marks was dealing with some injuries. So that was something to note as well. And on the Cardinals side of things here, Chris, Michael Wilson, 11 targets, manages to get his way into the end zone, even if he didn't absolutely dominate as expected against a Texans secondary.
Yeah, Michael Wilson, Lisa Nagaib. I mean, he is the prophet right there, because just we don't get Marvin Harrison Jr. and he goes up against one of the best defenses, and he still didn't have a dominant performance, but good enough performance that if you stuck with him, you went with the whole start your studs thing during fantasy playoffs. I mean, he rewards you with the touchdown. So yeah, between him and Trey McBride, that is pretty much all any quarterback needs. That's why I was so upset about the Bengals, because you just need a solid wide receiver 1 and a solid tight end, and apparently you can do this against one of the best defenses in the league. And seeing that, I mean, at least should give folks at least some confidence starting both of these guys throughout the remainder of the fantasy playoffs. Yeah,
Jawar Jordan led the team in Houston with 17 touches here, again, as Woody Marks was dealing with some injuries. They get the Raiders next week, so if Marks isn't able to go, perhaps he'll be somebody off the waiver wire we're talking about. He did look good. I think
9.2 yards per carry. I mean, he was solid.
I think it was the best performance by a Texans running back all year statistically. So
would not surprise me. And they play the Raiders
thing that
week.
Happened. Exactly. So I'm sure we'll be talking about him a little bit on the waiver wire show tomorrow. Commanders 29, Giants 21. I'll be honest, didn't see too much of this game. I did see Darius Slayton drop a deep touchdown, as I predicted. I guess the big story here is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt returns with Chris Rodriguez, a late inactive this week. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt gets into here for 90 rushing yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, and if you started Terry McLaurin, you're rewarded looking at his usage. I mean, yeah, it was kind of the split between Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, but of course, it's McLaurin that comes down with a deep touchdown too, which kind of coming in this game, I thought with the Giants secondary being banged up, that was going to be the case. 51-yard score, solid outing for McLaurin, a decent stat line for Marcus Mariota. So if you plugged him in as a potential streamer in Superflex or 2 QB leagues, also like not too bad from Mariota as well, because he got the 43 yards rushing to go with the passing touchdown.
Next game up here, Bears 31, Browns 3. Again, the Bears just controlled this one throughout. DeAndre Swift, big time game on the ground, 2 touchdowns, over 90 rushing yards. Caleb Williams had one of the most insane touchdowns you're ever going to see on DJ Moore's second touchdown of the game. I mean, just that is one of those great throw. Don't ever do it again. He just completely throws across his body through multiple defenders. Although Caleb said after the game, I can make any throw. So it sounds like he'll probably try to do that thing again. So this team was supposed to have Roma Dunze, and literally 3 minutes before kickoff, we find out he's active, but he's not going to play because he aggravated his foot injury. So very frustrating. I had a lineup. We were live on Fantasy Football Live, obviously. It's in the title. And I'm trying to make lineup changes as the show is coming to a close. So very stressful if you had Roma Dunze in your lineup. But Luther Burden, who also got a little banged up in this one, led the team with 84 receiving yards.
Yeah, around a 60% route rate for Luther Burden, but hopefully that was mostly just because of I think it was like an ankle injury or something along those lines. Cole Kmet also came up with an ankle injury like during this when he got tackled along the right sideline. And with Colston Loveland also playing as well, got 5 targets in this game. We'll see if it's going to be something of an expanded role for the rookie tight end. But yeah, I think better days ahead for Kyle Monangai if you've been looking towards him. He actually out-carried DeAndre Swift once they got into the red zone, but it was just Swift that wound up falling into the end zone a couple of times this week. So no, I think Monangai's played well enough and put enough of those tough runs down on film that he should continue to see at least a 40 to 50% amount of the work moving forward.
Just rough day for the Browns offense too. I think with the state of their offensive line right now, it's going to be really difficult to stay ahead of the sticks. And then Shedeur Sanders is just going to be getting waves and waves of pressure. So a lot of takeaways for the Bears in this one here. So just tough for the Browns offense. I don't know if you noticed anything from their offense here today.
Just 14 targets for Harold Fannin. So if you started him, you were happy. And then, of course, Jerry Jeudy with just another like a bizarre game where he looks like he's going to catch a touchdown, but then Jalen Johnson steals his lunch money for the interception afterwards. So just tough. The only thing that really stuck out to me is not for this season, but 2026, Isaiah Bond as a sleeper, just for assuming Shedeur is going to be the one that's under center for the Browns, how often he looks for him on those deeper targets. If he's in the back end of the draft, I could see a lot of folks kind of hinting as him as the guy that you want to try and target from a draft standpoint, just for those explosives that him and Sanders seem to hook up on every once in a while.
Last game here today, Eagles 31, Raiders 0. Again, this had to be one of the shortest games of the season. It was over so fast. And not even just like Tanner McKee was playing with essentially the entire fourth quarter left for the Philadelphia Eagles. Kenny Pickett had 64 yards passing. But this game truly ended timing-wise so quickly. Like this was over so fast. And probably the line of the day was from Rob Gronkowski for the Fox halftime show, I believe. He said, the Raiders are like Neosporin. You got something wrong with it, you just play them, it's gonna fix whatever wound you have. So that was what the Raiders were for the Eagles today, Chris.
Yeah, the good news, Hurts completed 70% of his passes. He didn't throw an interception, but it was just 15 attempts, and 10 of them came in the first 2 quarters. I mean, he only passed the ball just a few times in the second half. So, yeah, if you were starting A.J. Brown, yet you were happy the fact that he got his 1 target in the second half that wound up getting him into the end zone, a couple of deep shots for Devonta Smith, but otherwise it was really just short targets to Dallas Goedert. 4.1 air yards per target. I mean, Hurts really trying to play just a nice and safe game this week and have them let's just get into week 16 and let's try and forget all the stuff that happened when he played against the Chargers last week.
Yeah. Like Gronk said, heals all wounds. So shout out to the Raiders for being that for the Philadelphia Eagles today. That's going to do it for us today. Chris, appreciate you, buddy. I hope all of your playoff matchups went well, and I really enjoyed breaking week 15 down with you, man.
Another chaotic week and just a lot of stuff that we're going to have to continue to monitor, especially with all the injuries. But no, always happy to sit down and talk ball with you, man. We'll do it again next week.
No doubt about it. I'm sure there are things we missed from this very chaotic week 15, but good news, we're going to be back tomorrow on Monday. Justin Boone joins me for the next edition of the Fantasy Football Trust Meter as we head into the fantasy playoffs, round number 2 here. We're going to look at the players you've been counting all season and debate if you can trust them here as we go to round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. That's going to happen right here live, 5 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Until then, we are out.